Hello, welcome once again to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42 here with Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. And once again, we've got a massive slate of games, and we're going to go ahead and give you the breakdown. We're not going game by game. We're going to go position by position because game by game would take us hours, and we know that we don't have hours of time. You don't have hours of time, so we're not gonna take up your entire day talking about DraftKings here. So, with that being said, there are some great top arms, a lot of great lefties on the mound today.
Yep.
And surprisingly, throughout all of this, we were talking before the show, Jeremy Guthrie, the second biggest favorite on the board today behind David Price, which I could care less about. The guy's an awful pitcher. I still won't be playing him. And looking at the DraftKings pricing here, if you're going at starting pitching, the one guy you're going to anchor your lineups with, I'm going to be going with David Price and Johnny Cueto if I'm paying up over here, because you got Johnny Cueto at only 9,500. Milwaukee bats outside of that ridiculous game last night, pretty awful this season. Cueto keeps the ball on the ground for a fair amount, and David Price pitching really well, and he's at $1,800 cheaper than Clayton Kershaw. So who are you paying up for here?
I think I'm going Kershaw if I can. It's going to be really tough at 12.5, but I feel pretty good about him. I have no issues with Price or Cueto. I think they're both really solid plays. I think they're all pretty solid favorites here too.
Yeah.
I even like Madison Bumgarner in this game, but obviously I'm not going to play them against each other. But I think that's a pretty interesting play too for GPPs. But as far as cash games go, I think I'm looking at Kershaw, and then I might go a little bit cheaper here. The one guy I really like today is J.A. Happ against Houston. Feel pretty good about that. I think he's a pretty decent favorite here, too. I think he's actually a bigger favorite than some of those top-line guys, and he's only $6,400 on DraftKings. I think it's a great price. That's going to be my plan here, is to pair Kershaw and J.A. Happ for cash games. Might change a little bit throughout the day. I do like these other top guys, like we mentioned. Even Cole Hamels is a pretty solid start today at 9,200. He's one of the bigger favorites on the board also. So we got a lot of favorites to pay up for, but if I'm going Kershaw, it's going to be really tough to pay for another top arm like Cueto, even as much as I'd like to, because, I mean, there's just not a lot of value at hitting that I'm really confident in, and there's a lot of high upside hitters again today, especially with that game in Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to want to get at least one of these top arms with so many big arms on the mound. You know, you're going to see some 30-point fantasy performances on DraftKings today, and if you cheap out on pitching, you're going to need a lot from your hitters. So I'm with you there. You're going to have to get one of these top arms. I do want Kershaw, of course. If I can make him fit, I'm going to make that happen. But you know, you're going to need to go down to one of these middle range guys, and it's going to be tough to find. I mean, I don't mind Doug Fister. He's an adequate pitcher, and the Cardinals weren't particularly. They were about league average against righties last year. So I think, as far as safety goes, I'll probably go around Doug Fister around that price. But there's really none of these cheap options I love. I mean, Jared Cozart against a bad lineup, he keeps the ball on the ground, but he doesn't strike anyone out. So that's the concern with him. I mean, really none of these other guys I feel great about. I mean,
the only other guy really in there that I was looking at besides Happ was Vance Worley. I think is okay. He's a pretty decent favorite today. The Cubs offense looked really good yesterday, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Liriano got some strikeouts in there, but I thought the Cubs offense looked really solid, especially later in the game. But Vance Worley at 6,100, I don't mind. He's a favorite too. I think he probably goes 6 innings. I prefer Happ. I think there's a little bit more upside there, but there's also a little bit more downside. So,
yeah, I agree with you there. As someone who rostered quite a bit of Liriano last night, I was terrified every time he was throwing a pitch last night against that lineup. But ended up not being too bad, I guess. You know, three earned runs. According to the scorekeeper, I think it should have been 2, but it's all subjective there, I guess. All right, moving on here to catcher, where once again Derek Norris makes for a good play. If you want to play Derek Norris, I know it's getting boring now, but in Coors Field, he's got 4 doubles in his last 2 games, going up against Kyle Kendrick, who, as we know, was awful last year. He's awful this year. He'll be awful if he still has a job next year. So get yourself some shares of him. Stephen Vogt's the guy who's been showing some power, and he's going against a fly ball pitcher today in Jared Weaver. So at $3,600, I love him tonight. Anybody else you're looking at here at catcher?
If Hundley's starting again, he's a guy I'm going to look at. 3,100 on DraftKings. I played him a bunch last night. Had one of the slowest developing triples I've ever seen in my life. But he also had a home run. It looks like he's hitting the ball pretty well right now. I don't love the Shields matchup as much as I liked yesterday's, but for 3,100, it's pretty hard to argue with. I think he hit 5th yesterday. I'd be surprised if he wasn't hitting probably sixth today. I think he's been hitting seventh against righties a little bit more often, but I think he's probably going to hit sixth after what he did yesterday. I like him quite a bit. If Mescaroso's back in the lineup today, I don't mind him, but I mean, it's really hard to pass up Derek Norris unless you're really just like putting together a ton of GPP lineups.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been rock solid. Kendrick is not a guy I'm afraid of whatsoever. He's probably going to hit second in the order again like he has been. I mean, it's just a really, really solid situation.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm with you there. I mean, in cash games, it's just going to be Derek Norris. It's easy enough. You go ahead and slot him in and make your tough decisions elsewhere. All right, moving on to first base, where my favorite first baseman once again paid off for me again last night, Joey Votto. Once again in a fine spot. The guy is just mashing the ball. He's got 6 homers already. He's walking a ton. I mean, he's getting on base, multiple hits in 3 straight games. He's still my favorite play. Call me a homer, call me whatever you want. I'm the guy who's making money off Joey Votto, so you can call me whatever you'd like. And I don't regret Joey Votto once again tonight.
Yeah, definitely not. He's a top option up there. I'm looking at Ortiz is probably the other guy I'm looking at in that 4K plus price range. I know Ortiz is a little bit cheaper. Gotta love Votto, though. Prince Fielder, we talked about before the show. You played last night, had a nice home run late in the game. We knew the power was going to come around eventually. I think he's got a really nice matchup again today. At Arizona again, 4,600. He feels like a strong play to me again, especially if the power's coming around right now.
Yeah.
As far as cheaper guys go, the guy you mentioned yesterday, I think, on the podcast, Mark Canha. Did we figure out how to say that?
I think it's Canha. I'll have to ask Josh about that one, but I think it's Canha.
Yeah, it looks like it's Canha. But 2,900 at Los Angeles, facing Weaver, whose velocity's way down, probably hitting second in the order. I mean, he's a pretty good value play there. He also has outfield eligibility, so that's nice. He's a guy that I'm probably going to be working into some lineups as a value play today.
Yeah. I mean, if you want Kershaw, you're going to need a guy like that. And he's a guy with some power, and he's got the versatility, first base and outfield, like you mentioned. So he's a great value tonight.
Yeah, it looks like the wind's blowing out to left there also today, which is nice. So
which is awful for Jared Weaver, who cannot keep the ball on the ground to save his life.
Well, it's because he's throwing 85-mile-an-hour fastballs right down the middle all the time.
Yeah, he's throwing the Bronson Arroyo special all the time. But 2 other guys I wanted to mention here, both against the same awful pitcher, Michael Kadire and Lucas Duda. Eric Stoltz, as we know, one of the worst starters tonight, one of the worst starters in general in the major leagues. So definitely very beatable. Both those guys swinging a pretty decent bat right now. And
nice prices today, too.
Yeah, 44 and 4,200. So I think that's about all for my list there at first base. If you want to ride the hot streak, we know he's a hot streak guy. Edwin Encarnacion, 2 homers last night. So we know he makes for a good GPP guy tonight as well.
Definitely.
All right, moving on here to second base, where you've got Jose Altuve facing off against a lefty in Seattle. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself some Jose Altuve. His price at 4,200, him being the 7th highest second baseman tonight. I like that a lot on in this situation. A tough matchup, but if you want a hot hitter and a GPP, Howie Kendrick is really cheap at $3,800. Madison Bumgarner hasn't looked like himself. I'm not saying I'm picking on him tonight, but hot hitter behind another hot hitter, really cheap price tag. I don't mind him tonight for a cheap GPP shot.
You know who I'm furious about today? Zobrist is going to sit out again against Weaver. Yep. I'm so mad. I wanted to play him so bad yesterday, and he ended up sitting out, and I think he's going to sit out again today. But I like Cano a little bit today. 4,400 against Hernandez. Nice lefty-righty matchup there. Yeah. Feel pretty good about him at that price. Chase Utley against Cozart. He's been awful, so he's probably a little bit more of a GPP play, but he's under 4K now. Feel okay about him in GPPs. There's not really a lot else to like at second base here. Jerko, fine play. Hitting 7th probably, though, today. That's
if
more of
a... gets a nice slot. I don't mind him at 37.
Yeah, I was going to mention him at third base, but yeah, I agree there. I was hoping he was going to play yesterday. I actually wrote him up in GPP picks yesterday, but I feel pretty good about him if he gets a nice slot at second base or third base. Probably second base is the way to go with him, though, because, like you said, after Altuve and probably Cano, there's just not really a lot to like at second base today. Maybe Jace Peterson, 2,800, has second base and third base eligibility, too. Facing a righty and Gee today. He struggled a little bit with the lefties over the last couple games, but should get it going with a righty on the mound today.
Yeah, I like that call. And yeah, like you said, second base pretty thin tonight. So third base, pretty much the opposite of that. There's a lot of guys I like at third base here. You've got Josh Donaldson is hot. Chris Bryant is hot. Todd Frazier got it going last night. Will Middlebrooks. I mean, Kyle Seager against variety. I mean, take your pick. There's a ton of guys at third base that are viable options tonight.
Yeah, it sounds like Arenado will be back in the lineup tonight too. I think he said that after the game that he was available to pinch hit last night, and he's probably going to play today. So he's an interesting play at 4,200 also.
Yeah, Mike Moustakas at 4,100 against a bad pitcher as well. You don't like paying his price tag necessarily, but at least he gets a righty this time, and he has been batting second. Homered last night, so I mean that's one of the hottest offenses in baseball still. So if you can get a piece of it, I'm going to be definitely getting myself some Royals exposure tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of options at third base. Chris Davis and Miguel Cabrera, both first base, third base guys that have a lot of upside for GPPs. They're a little pricey, but I like the matchups for both of them today. Cash game play wise, Matt Carpenter is always in the conversation, 4,500, facing Fister. Don't love the Cardinals lineup right now, but he's just been rock solid.
Yep. Yeah, and one other guy I want to throw in, he's really cheap, David Freese against Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray's been pitching well, but I mean, hitting in the heart of that Angels order, we saw him score 14 runs last night. This team could put him up in a hurry, and $3,300 is a great price for a guy in that position.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, moving on here to shortstop, where Troy Tulowitzki, I mean, granted it's against James Shields, who's a much better pitcher than most of the guys we target at Coors Field, but still a 10-run total. Tulowitzki just $4,800 tonight at home.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, a lot of these Colorado prices are down. I don't know if it was because of the ownership percentages the last 2 days. I was telling you I played a lot of Colorado stacks last night, actually, and they were fairly low owned, especially the higher priced guys. Didn't really work out for me because I had Carlos Gonzalez in most of them, and he dropped that nice 0 for me. But
yeah,
it's definitely a stack you can go back to, especially at the lower prices. I think it's going to make them much higher owned, though, especially in some of these combination lineups where people are looking for a shortstop, because shortstop and second base, I mean, they're just pretty weak overall. Outside of Tulowitzki, who is probably the guy I'm going to go with most of the time, I mean, it's really hard to justify a lot of these other shortstops when they're only priced like 800, 600 less than him. Jimmy Rollins is probably the guy that I'd look at again. He's going to be hitting from the right side of the plate tonight against Bumgarner, which isn't a great matchup, but at 3,200 batting leadoff, I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with if you're not playing Tulowitzki.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy we were talking about yesterday at 36, and now he's even cheaper today. So, yeah, it's hard. I mean, if you're going to pivot off Tulowitzki, like you said, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pivot to one of these other expensive options and not target the best hitter and the best hitting environment in Tulowitzki.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to want to go way down, and Rollins is that guy for me. I mean, there's a couple other guys you can look at, I guess, but like, do you want to take them for 300 less than Rollins or 500 less than Tulowitzki? Probably not.
Yeah, only other cheap guy I'm looking at, and as a Reds fan, it terrifies me to say this once again, but he looks really good. Zach Cozart.
Yeah,
2 homers again last night. I pulled him out of my cash game lineup at 6:30 because I remember what a terrible hitter he's been in his life. But, man, I mean, it worked out fine, but
good.
still.
He's looked good.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 4 homers in his last 4 games. He's only – the best thing that I like about what I've seen, looking into his numbers, he struck out 1 time in the last 7 games. Like that was a big thing with Cozart, not putting the ball in play, but – obviously, I don't expect the power surge to continue, and he does hit 8th in the order pretty much every night. But, I mean, if you like riding a hot streak, he's only 3,500. So, I guess you could do worse. But
yeah, definitely.
I'm with you. I'll probably get Tulowitzki. All right, moving on here to the outfield, where Colorado bats may be cheap, but San Diego bats are not. Matt Kemp, $5,800. Justin Upton at $5,500, the 2 most expensive guys on the board. And both pretty big disappointments last night. I had myself some Justin Upton against the lefty, and he went ahead and threw up that dud with 3 points. But I think both these guys obviously in play tonight against Kyle Kendrick.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, the Colorado bats are cheap. Carlos Gonzalez, after that 0 last night, it's only 4,400 against a righty. Where did I see Blackman was at?
I think he was 42.
Yeah, I think that's what he was last night.
43.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's a decent price. You can get that stack pretty easily today, which is why I'm a little concerned with it being higher owned. Outside of that, there's a few other guys I like. Mookie Betts is an interesting one for me. I like Boston against Carnes a little bit today. And then as far as value guys go, Eric Young hit 9th last night, which is a little concerning. But if he's back at the top of the order today, Against a righty, I'd feel okay about him at 2,800. Jeff Francoeur is a guy that's just like dirt cheap and hitting fourth for the Phillies right now. He's not a guy that's been really solid, but for 2,300, if you're trying to pitch Kershaw and maybe a second stud, that's a guy that you can use a little bit. We mentioned Kanai at 2,900 at first base, also outfield eligible. Sam Fold is the other guy I was looking at, facing a pretty weak righty in Weaver tonight, 3,300 for Oakland. He's okay too. There's a bunch of decent value options. You can even look at Puig as a value option today, 3,600 against Bumgarner, probably hitting in the top towards the top of the order. Not really an elite cash game play, but definitely some GPP upside there.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him because I saw that price today, and like you said, you don't love the matchup, of course, or even the hitting environment, but at the same time, I mean, massive upside with him at 3,600.
Yeah.
And Bryce Harper's still really cheap at 4,300 if you want to go that route. Starling Marte is a guy who's been really hot. Homered again last night. He's 4,600, so he's kind of pricey, but 4 home runs in his last 4 games, 8 RBI during that span too. So I mean, he's a guy that strikes out a lot, but doesn't matter on DraftKings. No negatives for outs, no matter how they come. So I think he makes for a good tournament option. And Will Myers, he's producing just as much, if not more, than Justin Upton right now, but 5K. So obviously, if you're getting a stack there, you're gonna need to get him. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's a couple of cheap guys you don't love, but I mean, in a great spot, you get a cleanup hitter as one of the cheapest players on the board right now.
Right.
I mean, that's got to be the way you go, really. You can get, if you throw Francoeur and Kanai in there with Clayton Kershaw, I mean, it's going to be a lot easier for you to fit in a second stud or even just a solid rest of your lineup. So I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's something I'm definitely going to look at for cash games because I mean, if Francoeur gets you one hit, like you're going to be pretty okay with that. And
Yep.
I mean, he's going to go for 4 a decent amount, but I mean, for 2,300, it's just hard not to consider him if you're trying to get Kershaw in there over David Price, who, like you mentioned when we were talking about pitchers, is almost 2,000 cheaper.
Yeah.
You got to save somewhere to get Kershaw in over him because that's probably going to give you an advantage tonight with all these other aces, like you mentioned, like Cueto. We talked about Hamels a little bit. It's pretty easy just to settle for those guys and play 2 of them or something. So Kershaw should be a nice advantage tonight if we can work him into our lineups.
Yeah, and especially in cash games. I mean, you've got legitimate 65 to 70 point fantasy upside if you can get 2 aces in your lineup. So you're not going to need a whole hell of a lot out of your lineup if you can get 2 of these big names in there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right, with that, that's going to wrap things up here for us, DraftKings Daily Trot. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com. Follow us on Twitter at DFCafe, and we will see you next time.